One aircraft which helped bring a swift victory into the coalition's hands during the 1991 war against Iraq was the McDonnell Douglas AV-8B day attack Harrier, a descendant of the first generation Hawker Siddeley Harriers used by our Navy in the Falklands conflict. In the Gulf War, the AV-8Bs would be used to help support the Marines on the ground in their advance north into Iraqi-occupied Kuwait, being directed to targets by forward air controllers who are either on the ground or in FA-18Ds or OV-10 Broncos. In the heat of the conflict, VMA-542 were flying 30+ sorties a day, a truly impressive feat achieved by some of the finest aviators in the world. Accomplished by the Harrier's versatility as a close air support platform and the type's ability to operate from airfields 5 minutes away from the combat zone. The AV-8Bs were the day attack versions, having the inertial navigation system, improved heads-up display, CCIP, and ARBS or angled rate bombing system, which was a passive sensor which was good at placing bombs where the crews knew there were targets. However, not the greatest at scanning large areas and zooming in on possible targets. The Harriers needed some help with this, provided by the FACs with binoculars and FLIR pods on the Hornet. There will be several Marine Corps AV-8B squadrons in the Gulf. Most well known were VMA-311, operating out of Bahrain in Operation Desert Shield and moving to King Abdul Aziz Naval Air Base before the war broke out. They weren't 300 miles behind the border like most USAF squadrons, they were in the thick of it, 5 minutes of flight time from the Kuwaiti border. The Marines made good use of a nearby football stadium, setting up tents and resting there. The aircraft themselves would be cycling around in pairs, timing landings between takeoffs to retain an extremely efficient and present support of the ground forces. After months of being in theatre, the Marine Harriers finally got to prove themselves, as the venerable design once again was thrust into combat. On the 17th of January 1991, the war for Kuwait broke out, and in the morning, 2 pairs of AV-8Bs left on a mission to destroy Iraqi artillery firing onto Khafji. 10 minutes after takeoff at 8,000 feet, they reached the border. An overcast was setting in, however due to the threat of SAMs and manpads, they didn't go low level. The Harriers were talking to an FAC and an OV-10 Bronco, who were spotting the targets. One of these was an artillery battery firing onto advancing Marines, and using CCIP, the Harriers dove at a 20-degree angle, dropping 4 1,000-pound bombs in pairs, completing 2 passes on the targets. After checking that there were no RWR contacts, they turned back round and used 300 rounds of their 25mm GAL-12 equalizers to strafe the targets, completing a total of 4 strafing runs. The jets played an important role in the Battle of Khafji between the 29th to the 31st of January, helping the Marines on the ground repel attacks from the Iraqi Army's 29th Mechanized Brigade. Ordnance-wise, the Harriers would carry sidewinders, however would be dropped later on in the war as the Iraqi Air Force seemed to pose little opposition to the Harriers' operations. 1 every 4 aircraft carried a DECM jamming pod. Most aircraft carried either 500-pound Mark 82 Snake Eyes with fins banded shut, 1,000-pound Mark 83 bombs, or the CBU 100 Rockeye or Mark 20 cluster bomb, these cluster bombs being more favoured by the pilots. However, some flights carried napalm canisters as well as the AGM-65V Maverick being lased by ground units. Crews could have done with the IR-guided Mavericks, which were so readily available for the Air Force's A-10s, however they had to make do with the limited number of AGM-65Es. AV-8Bs would be waiting in King Abdul Aziz, pilots waiting in them to provide an almost instant CAS response. They would be called to the battlefield by FACs, who would direct them to the targets. The Harriers would destroy the target, then rearm at Tanjib, rearming twice there before landing back at King Abdul Aziz. The Iraqis would eventually set the oil fields alight, hindering the CAS from the Harriers and the advance of the ground troops. This tactic was predicted by the Marines, and 3 days before the ground war, the Harriers started to strafe trench lines filled with oil, which was suspected to be set alight when mechanized troops were advancing over them. The The most dangerous attack runs would be at low level, or first pass, haul-ass missions. These would be done at 550 knots at 20 feet, dropping snake eyes or napalm. Several AV-8Bs were lost, mostly due to passive IR SAMs such as the SA-7, 9, 14 or 16. Another squadron with a role to play in the Harrier's role in the Gulf War was VMA-542 Tigers. This squadron also operated out of King Abdulaziz Naval Air Base, starting the war with around 15 to 20 flights a day, ending with around 30 plus sorties, the highest for any Marine Corps AV-8B squadron. This squadron flew battlefield air interdiction sorties against targets such as artillery, trenches, tanks and command centres in the run-up for the ground invasion. Their sortie would start by a group of Harriers taking off at a set time, waiting over Kuwait until the FAC guided them to a target to engage in a kill box. The Harriers would also operate from ships. In the build-up and during the first parts of the war, it was undecided where Harriers from the assault ships USS Nassau and USS Tarawa would be needed. VMA-311 was finally brought into theatre on the 20th of February, where 4 AV-8Bs were sent to strike AAA on Failaka Island. When they got to the island, it was completely shelled out, so they moved on to the secondary target, Bubiyan Island. Operations from carriers will be doing similar missions to the Harriers at King Abdulaziz, just with the added carrier landing aspect. At 8 AM on the 28th of February 1991, operations ceased, and the squadron stayed in theatre for a further 2 weeks before returning or flying aboard carriers to Marine Corps air bases such as MCAS Iwakuni, MCAS Yuma and MCAS Cherry Point. I haven't mentioned all the squadrons deployed to the 1991 Gulf War with AV-8Bs, so here's a list of them. Marine Corps Harriers would return to the Middle East fighting the war against terrorism with the improved night attack and the AV-8B Harrier 2+. That brings this video to a close on the role of the AV-8B in the Gulf. Please like, subscribe and share to help the channel. And as always, thank you for watching and goodbye.